To everyone, this is meeting number 9 of the Standing Committee on International Trade pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, September the 18th, 2025. The committee is resuming its study of Canada and the forthcoming CUSMA review. We have with us today from the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, Ryan Gear, Senior Vice President, Public Affairs and National Policy. From Direct Sellers Association of Canada, Peter Maddox, President. And we are expecting to have online shortly from the MRC Thérèse de Bainville, Camille Albelté. He's not online yet, but we will have him online shortly. And we have Mr. Yasby online as well today. Welcome to all. As you know, you can have opening remarks of up to 5 minutes. Mr. Maddox, would you like to open it up, please?
Thank you to the Chair and Committee. DSA Canada was founded in 1954 and we have over 60 direct selling and supplier member companies, including well-known brands such as Mary Kay, Arbonne, Avon, Takara and Immunotech. We represent a diverse industry that is driven by an integrated North American market. We are also a member of the World Federation of Direct Selling Associations, a global organisation that helps lead industry ethical standards in over 50 markets. Each year, direct selling in Canada accounts for over $3 billion in retail sales and contributes $1.5 billion in personal revenue to the approximately 1 million Canadians who participate as independent sales consultants, 84% of whom are women. These consultants also build business skills and provide a service to their communities. Across Canada, the US and Mexico, total sales are over $60 billion annually. The industry we represent is unique in many ways. These distinct features make us an ideal case study of the challenges of trade uncertainty and the need for strong trading relationships. Firstly, DSA Canada stakeholders include large multinational consumer goods companies, small regional businesses, as well as the micro-entrepreneurs who comprise our sales force. Further, our members sell everything from foods to natural health supplements to cosmetics, clothing, jewellery and kitchenware, all products that are impacted by trade challenges. Finally, our members are located in Canada, the US, Latin America, Asia and Europe, and they all choose to do business in this country. For these reasons, the future of CUSMA is vital to the ongoing health of our member companies and to entrepreneurs across Canada. While we will provide specific detail in our upcoming written submission, I would today like to discuss key concerns and ideas for negotiations with continental partners. Firstly, I want to highlight the value of an equitable de minimis duties exemption for many North American businesses. The ability to ship small quantities of legitimate products directly to consumers across North America creates amazing opportunities to grow a customer base. Since the US removed their de minimis duties exemption in late August, all of our Canadian-based members have changed business approaches by either halting US expansion, exiting the US, moving warehousing to the US, or simply spending precious time and money on completing new customs obligations, each of which are detrimental to the Canadian economy. According to the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, nearly 1/3 of Canadian SMEs expect to be negatively affected by the loss of the US de minimis exemption. We ask for the maintenance of a de minimis exemption in Canada and efforts towards the restoration of an equivalent value CUSMA-specific exemption in the US to serve its original purpose of enabling the pursuit of small-scale yet additive commercial success. Secondly, Article 15.10.1 of the current CUSMA agreement specifically defines direct selling as an integral part of small and medium business, and the agreement provides provisions for protecting consumers and ensuring the voice of entrepreneurship in policy. We ask that this content and its commitment continue to be included in a renegotiated CUSMA, so that our industry and all entrepreneurs can thrive and contribute to regional trade. Thirdly, to help itself at this uncertain time and to unlock investment funds that business is apprehensive to engage, Canada must commit to cutting red tape and improving pathways to market, as prioritised by the Prime Minister. As an example, a streamlined natural health product approval process can greatly enhance Canadian innovation and competitiveness, and help reduce the challenge created by personal importation of unapproved products. Canada should use this difficult trade window as an impetus to re-engineer processes for internal improvement and nation building. Direct selling is not only a significant contributor to the North American economy, but the embodiment of modern entrepreneurship. By preserving the existing language defining our industry, as well as taking the opportunity to update policies that affect success, government can further strengthen this impact. Our largely female-driven industry has been a vital part of communities for many years and will play an ongoing role in the prosperous, low-barrier and low-tariff partnership amongst our three nations. DSA Canada appreciates this committee's consideration and stands ready to provide additional information as needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Greer, please, for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair and committee members, for inviting Canadian manufacturers and exporters to appear today as part of this study. For the last 154 years, CME has been the voice of Canadian manufacturing, helping Canada's industrial economy grow, compete, and create prosperity in communities across the country. Our sector employs 1.8 million Canadians, generates nearly $850 billion in annual sales, and produces 2/3 of Canada's value-added exports. The driving idea behind NAFTA and later CUSMA is that Canada, the United States, and Mexico can achieve stronger growth and global competitiveness by removing barriers, integrating production, and treating North America as one platform rather than three separate markets. This is no longer a shared belief and has led to U.S. policies that are making North America's industrial base less reliable and less competitive. As a result, Canada will face a difficult negotiating environment in the upcoming review. We must approach it not with defensiveness, but with purpose, to try better position CUSMA as a vehicle to address our shared economic and geopolitical challenges while preserving the core benefits that have fueled continental manufacturing growth. Over the last few weeks, CME has surveyed 250 manufacturers from across the country on the future of the agreement. Here's what we found. 96% of manufacturers support extending the agreement during the 2026 review. Only 3% oppose. 75% indicate a non-renewal in 2026 would negatively impact their business. Only 2% say it would have no impact. Opinions are decided on Canada accepting a baseline tariff. 18% of manufacturers say any baseline tariff would make their business uncompetitive. 13% say they could manage a tariff of up to 2.5%. 25% say they could manage a tariff of up to 5%. Another 24% say they could manage a tariff of up to 10%. Only 2% of manufacturers say they would remain competitive with a tariff rate above 15%. And notwithstanding the reputational and economic damage caused by U.S. actions, a full 88% of manufacturers support increased economic integration in North America. These findings make it clear that even in the face of capricious U.S. trade action, manufacturers want Canada to pursue a pragmatic, solutions-driven approach to Canada-U.S. trade. With these results in mind, I'd like to just very briefly share some of CME's priorities heading into the review. The first and most urgent is to find relief from the unjustified Section 232 tariffs. Thousands of workers have already lost or are at risk of losing their jobs because of these tariffs, and we hope that we can secure a 232 relief through bilateral discussions as soon as possible. The second is to preserve Canada's U.S. market access and the continuity of existing manufacturing supply chains. As obvious as it sounds, preserving production networks that have been built up over decades is essential to encouraging regional investment and keeping high-value manufacturing jobs in North America. The third is to strengthen our shared approach to safeguarding the North American market from unfair trading practices by non-market economies. Canada, the U.S., and Mexico face common threats from subsidized and dumped imports, particularly from China, and we should continue to align on measures to protect North American producers. I want to pause on this point because despite the damaging actions that have been taken towards Canada, we need to remember that a long-term, whole-of-government bipartisan consensus largely exists in the U.S. around the issues of economic and national security vis-a-vis China. Fourth, we need to enhance North American cooperation in energy and critical minerals. We know this is important to the U.S., and a renewed agreement could create an opportunity to align on issues such as permitting, investment incentives, and stockpiling to strengthen continental supply chains and reduce reliance on non-allied sources. Fifth, strengthen the North American defense industrial base. As Canada increases its defense spending, there will be an opportunity for Canada not just to enhance our own sovereign capabilities, but also to strengthen our shared North American defense industrial base. Sixth, rationally assess Canada's own trade irritants and reliability. Canada should re-examine our approach to protected sectors, supply chain reliability, and other border irritants issues we know are important to the U.S. Seventh, we think there is an opportunity to activate underused CUSMA committees and working groups. Mechanisms in the agreement, such as the Competitiveness Committee and the Good Regulatory Practices Committee, remain largely dormant. They could be used to develop faster, real-time strategic responses to the emerging economic and geopolitical challenges facing our countries. Lastly, we believe that Canada can push to help enhance the compliance mechanisms to address irritants and improve the agreement's functioning. Canada should support stronger, more transparent enforcement tools that ensure all parties meet their obligations. In conclusion, we recognize that Canada's ability to preserve our trade agreement with a partner that views trade as zero-sum will undoubtedly require a number of difficult, high-stakes discussions, decisions, and trade-offs. As we did during the last negotiation, CME will use our seat at the table to help ensure that the interests of Canadian manufacturers and their workers are represented in our efforts to preserve North America as the best place in the world to make things. Thanks, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Our third witness has not connected to this point, so we will go on to questions from our members, and if he connects later, we'll just have to interrupt the proceedings. Okay, Mr. McKenzie, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Greer, could I ask you about the CBSA Assessment and Review Management, or CARM, system? Do you hear very much from your members about its implementation and ongoing use at this time?
Yes, we heard concerns prior to implementation and since implementation, and I think most notable for this committee's work, we know that U.S. users are facing some problems, and this is an irritant that I'm sure will be raised by the U.S. during this process. And I know part of their concern is around the availability of import and export data. So we can expect that to ask to be addressed from the U.S. side, and surely working closely with exporters to address it on the Canadian side is important.
And generally speaking, for small business people, it is a difficult system to access and often unwieldy. Would that be fair in terms of feedback you get from your membership?
We've had varying feedback. I wouldn't sort of try to summarize it in just one sentence. Some have had problems, others have had less so. But I think in short, for SMEs, these kinds of changes, we heard a lot of anxiety prior to implementation for a bunch of obvious reasons. And we think efforts to double down on engaging with industry, hearing feedback and correcting for it should be a top priority for CBSA.
Thank you very much. I believe you have said something very similar to China's neo-mercantilist approach to international trade in North American marketplace is something to be concerned about. I had to look that up, and I wonder if you could explain or talk about that statement and what your members see as the risk from China's participation, or indeed increased trade relationship between Canada and China.
Sure. In general, it's a long-term trend since China's ascension to the WTO, which has not led them to adopt pure market-based reforms and integrate fairly into a multilateral trading system. Instead, it has been a very strategic sector-by-sector approach to try to increase production, over-subsidize specific industries, dump them on world markets to try to undermine production of those goods and services in other countries. So in general, while organizations like ours are not in favor of tariffs or trying to protect domestic producers, we are a trade-exposed industry, and our members compete on that basis. When you have trading partners, I'll put that in quotation marks, who are not abiding by the same rules and are seeking to not just sell to those who wish to buy, but to actively undermine global markets, we think it's not only something that we should be concerned about on behalf of Canadian manufacturers, but of course it's something we know that there's a bipartisan focus on in the U.S., and we hope an area where Canada and the U.S. can align on our approach to dealing with and managing goods that are being dumped on the market in that manner.
That makes me think of something you said in your opening remarks about the value in or benefit of a closer, more integrated market. It allows for the protection together against unfair trade practices, because that's really what we're talking about when it comes to China, isn't it?
Yeah, it needs to be the focus. Canada does a lot of business with China. We sell a lot to China. Canadian manufacturers rely on a number of Chinese inputs that cannot be accessed in Canada or the North American market, so it is not completely one or the other. However, there are specific sectors and activities where we know China is undertaking these unfair activities, and those are where we think there's opportunity to continue to align with the U.S. in particular and Mexico to protect the North American market. That said, in fairness to Canadian negotiators and others, Canada has followed the U.S. suit even prior to President Trump's election with specific measures around steel and EVs, and our reward for doing so is to get punished from China and to get punished from the Americans. So I think an important message that Canada needs to send to our American allies is if you want us to act in a way that is consistent with the interests of all of our shared manufacturers and their workers, they also, the Americans being, need to act in a way that is consistent with those behaviors. So unfortunately, we haven't gotten the support or the reaction we'd like from Americans for following suit or in some cases going farther on these policies.
Mr. Greer, do your members hear from their business partners, their either suppliers or customers in the States, that they're as concerned about some of the developments in our trading relationship as Canadians are?
I mean, at the moment, everybody in manufacturing supply chain is concerned with the current state of Canada-U.S. trade, but even the broader geopolitical global trading environment, which is shifting obviously much more towards regional blocks and towards economic and national security considerations. But broadly, all of our members, certainly all their supply chain members, are hearing a lot about the challenges of the current tariff, unjustified tariffs, the impact it's having both directly and indirectly on their businesses and their employees, and what it portends for the future, because nobody at this point wants to make any significant long-term investments. And so, well, they say nobody wins a trade war. I think some of our regional competitors in this instance are probably winning.
And that brings me to a point of great concern. When business senses uncertainty, capital stays on the sideline. Often there's talk in the House of Commons, to which we're adjacent, about public investment, but your members would invest a great deal of capital in their business plan and operations and expansions and opportunities that they see. But this uncertainty must be a tremendous burden right now.
Yeah, it is. Long-term investments are being postponed or not considered at all. Although it's going to compound the productivity problem that our sector and Canada has in particular when these investments are taking place. I think the opportunity is, although we don't control the decision-making coming out of Washington, D.C., we do control our own domestic policy environment. And so we hope the urgency that seemed quite present several months ago, and we hope remains present through the federal budget a few short days from now and beyond, to improve the domestic policy environment, to do everything we possibly can to incentivize businesses to invest in their workers, invest in their facilities, and invest in their products to compete better domestically in North America and abroad.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Fonseca, please, for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses, Mr. Greer, Mr. Maddox, for joining us here today and for your testimony. So, Mr. Greer, I want to ask you just about your membership. So, how many organizations belong to Canadian manufacturers and exporters? How many people would you represent across our country?
Thank you. Roughly 1,000 members, although we've got a lot of other sort of indirect members. Of those, it mirrors roughly the shape of the Canadian economy. So roughly 90% of our members would be small and medium-sized manufacturers. 10% would be sort of large, many multinational with operations in some cases Canada, the U.S., and Mexico.
Okay. And with all their employees, that'd be, I guess, in the hundreds of thousands?
Yes, correct.
In the hundreds of thousands. Aerospace, automotive, advanced manufacturing, pretty much the gamut, all sectors.
Every vertical, steel producers, forgers, energy manufacturers. We represent every vertical of the manufacturing industry in the country.
So when the government now is looking at projects of national interest, where would your members like to see the focus, some of those investments in border infrastructure? Would they like to see the harmonization around, regs at the border? What are your members looking for in that mid-long-term type of range?
It's really an all of the above type approach, so we need to build more of everything. Certainly trade enabling infrastructure has the virtue of making all of our members that use it more productive, so it is one of the best ways that you can invest a public infrastructure dollar. In terms of private investment, we were strongly supportive of C5 and in the Major Projects Office. However, it's the what's next. We want to see that office take on more projects. We want to see more projects get on the list. But we also want to know for all those small and medium-sized manufacturers who may not be part of some of these larger supply chains, what can be done to modernize and improve the regulatory environment in which they operate in. So we think an all of the above approach is really going to be necessary to unlock capital in such a risky environment.
So let's look at those SMEs and the tariff impact on business just across the board: steel, aluminum, lumber. Where do you see incentives where the government would be able to support to help SMEs weather this storm?
Well, I think the government has taken some good steps. Certainly the EI Worksharing program is something that several of our SME members and some of our larger members have had to access, are continuing to access. Some of the regional investment incentives, we're waiting to see how those roll out. Certainly the Strategic Response Fund, we're watching to see how that can be accessed. And more broadly, I think the government has done its best on remissions, which has been tremendously difficult and challenging. We've had some issues around, timing and the challenges of actually going through the remissions process. It can still be very burdensome and take quite some time for manufacturers. I think the most important factor for the government to consider going forward is just remaining flexible is the most important thing. As we've seen, the U.S. is threatening to increase tariffs. We've seen an expansion of the 232 derivatives list. We have some manufacturers who were completely CUSMA exempt up until a month and a half ago and then found everything they were exporting to the U.S. was subject to a 50% tariff. We need to make sure that federal responses and programming and remissions processes are as flexible and adaptable as the current environment is. And we think that's sort of the first step to trying to manage the situation. I think more broadly as well, as I mentioned earlier, we need to see a continuation or even an acceleration of sort of more broad-based measures to support business competitiveness and productivity. We can't keep everybody whole in an environment like this. What we can do is try to support investment and opportunity for as many businesses and workers as possible through looking at regulatory, tax, interprovincial trade, and some of those types of things.
Thanks. So as we approach the CUSMA review, the Prime Minister set up the PM Canada-U.S. Council. There's also a trade council that has been set up. So what we have in place today, is it providing the right opportunities for as a feedback loop so that your members can get information to our negotiators, to government, to be able to make those whatever decisions they need to make in real time? Like, are we getting that information the way that we need it so that we're able to be at our best when we are going through this CUSMA review?
I think from our perspective, we haven't had any issues communicating sort of risks and opportunities through to the government. As we transition to the CUSMA review process, last time around and I use the royal we because it was before I joined the organization, CME was one of a few national trade associations that had weekly and in some cases daily engagement with trade negotiators on what was on the table and how Canada was approaching it. So we are hopeful that type of approach continues again so that there can be a systematic, very formal way to understand what's going on. At the moment, on the bilateral side, it's a bit more difficult to tell how those negotiations are going and what's on the table, and we understand that there are probably some legitimate reasons for that. So we will continue to feed through to the government, and I think how they structure that process as we get into the formal CUSMA review will be very important.
Thank you, Mr. Greer. Mr. Maddox, just quickly.
We've got 17
Yeah,
seconds.
really quickly. So Team Canada, our strategy usually doesn't involve, when you look at small digital first firms, that traditionally they're not part of these trade consultations that we just heard from Mr. Greer. What would your recommendation be so that you can be part of these trade negotiations so that you feel that you're at the table, that your voice is being heard?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for
A
I'm
brief
glad to be
answer,
invited,
Mr.
and
Maddox,
I'm
I'm
glad I
sorry.
got to say 2 words. Thank you.
I know, time.
Time is always a problem. Mr. Bonan, welcome to the committee.
Bonjour, merci Madame la Présidente. Bonjour.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And hello, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here to replace my colleague today. I would like to come back to the Canada-U.S. Trade Council, which was announced in January 2025. So you're on that council. So have there been any actions taken recently by the council that you were involved in?
Does not sit on the Canada-U.S. Trade Council. We have, but we directly engage with all participating departments, ministries, and staff on an ongoing basis, but we're not directly a member of that council.
OK. Donc,
Okay, so you were consulted. Were you consulted on that by the council? And what type of consultation?
Through our staff and our president and CEO at various fora. Yeah.
OK. Et quel type de consultation?
And what type of consultation was done?
Both prior to the change in government, so under Prime Minister Trudeau, I know there was some work done and some events in Toronto, as well as some sort of informal outreach and conversations that happened with our president, CEO, and the council as well.
OK. Est-ce que vous en avez eu depuis?
Okay, so since then, since the new government came in, have you had any consultations?
Votre association en général?
What about your association in general?
OK. Est-ce que vous, de votre côté, vous avez eu des contacts?
On your hand, do you have any contact with U.S. Organizations that are similar to yours? And if so, what feedback have you gotten from them?
Closely with the U.S. National Association of Manufacturers, so they're our equivalent there. We're on sort of calls with them on a near weekly basis. They've been to Ottawa a couple of times, their leadership in the last 12 months. We've also spent time with them in D.C. and on Capitol Hill. In short, we've heard from them what I think many of you have heard from those in D.C. It is a bit of a scattershot approach to trying to figure out who has influence at any given moment around the administration, and they struggle with some of those same challenges in trying to communicate the virtue and values of North American manufacturing to the administration. And they also have members, some of who strategically can benefit from some certain tariffs or protectionist measures. But in general and in broad strokes, they have been continuing to advocate on Capitol Hill and with the administration for the future of CUSMA, how, roughly 3/4 of Canadian exports to the U.S. are inputs, so those inputs are what help fuel U.S. manufacturing. We will continue to work with them through the CUSMA process to ensure that we're aligned on how we're approaching governments. I would just add as well, we work very closely with our counterparts in Mexico as well, and in fact had all three associations in Ottawa almost this time last year to have discussions about the future of CUSMA and how it has benefited all of our organizations and their members.
Et les chiffres que...
And the numbers I saw date from June 2025, and you're the one who mentioned that about 16% of Canadian respondents in a survey that you conducted stated that they shifted some of their production to the USA in order to face rising costs and uncertainty with the American tariffs and so on. But do you have any more recent information on that? Your knowledge, is there a trend? Has it picked up or accelerated?
It's the ones that you just quoted. But anecdotally, we've heard for those who do have facilities in the U.S., you can sort of flex production on either side of the border, and there's obviously been an incentive to move around the tariff wall whenever they can. So anecdotally, we've heard that's continued, although I don't have any sort of specific figures around which percentage of members will have said that they've been able to do that.
Okay. Est-ce que on voit au sud de la frontière...
South of the border, well, there have been some backtracking in terms of the environment south on the behalf of the U.S. president. We've seen backtracking on the environment. What about your members? Are there any concerns because they may have made investments or positioned themselves strategically in connection with the energy transition? For example, the unfair competition could be involved, or in terms of the environment. Are there any considerations that you would consider important to include in the current negotiations for CUSMA?
Heard much, but I think part of that's because all the gravity and the focus has been on tariffs and the impact on tariffs. Prior to President Trump's election and the threat of an eventual imposition of tariffs, there was a tremendous amount of focus around investment incentives in clean technology and how that was taking investment south of the border. We've heard some concerns even around continued clean tech investment, given some of the incentives under the Big Beautiful Bill around write-offs and other tax incentives favoring manufacturing businesses. But the large majority of our members' focus has just been on tariff relief, how we can get out from under the tariffs and how we can get back to doing what we do best, which is building things together to compete with the rest of the world.
Thank you very much. Mr. Genero, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to both you, Peter and Ryan, for joining us here today. Sorry to do this to you, Peter, but I'm going to ask also Ryan some questions. There's you mentioned what I thought was an interesting statistic right off the bat, that 96% of your members agreed to extending the CUSMA agreement. Is that the agreement as it exists today in full? Was that the question, I guess?
Yeah, we basically just asked about extending the agreement as it exists, not any hypotheticals about what could be in a revised agreement or a renegotiated agreement.
Interesting. Okay. Well, thank you. So the diversification of the trading partners, we hear a lot of that at this committee, and we talk a lot about what that means. I think from some of your testimony, I gather that it's not just a let's diversify in a trading agreement somewhere else. It's what does the local environment look like? Hoping you can touch on some of that, perhaps what we could do and suggest from this committee.
Sure. So, in general, our members are supportive of efforts to diversify Canada's export markets. Many of them are actively trying to do so right now to try to backfill for some of the losses they've had for sales into the U.S. However, diversification is not a solution to our U.S. problem. The only solution to our U.S. problem is to solve our U.S. problem. North American manufacturing supply chains are so deeply integrated. Most of what we're selling are inputs into U.S. manufacturing processes that are flung back across the border as another value-added part to a Canadian process. There aren't a lot of Swedish automakers crying out for Canadian auto parts. So while we're supportive of efforts to diversify, we want to make sure that manufacturers don't get lost. I think there's some more opportunity when it comes to commodities and other bulk exports. It can be very difficult to both reach, manage, and service in a market that isn't the United States. And then one thing I think we hope doesn't get lost in the diversification issue is that part of what's going to give manufacturers or any other business access to another market is not just the ability to sell there, but to be cost competitive there. Canada can be a high-cost jurisdiction to do business. That is offset by our geography and our proximity and our access to the U.S. market. So any effort to diversify Canadian trade, again, which we think is worth trying to do, will need to be accompanied by a strong policy push to try to lower the cost of producing goods in Canada. So that's going to mean investments in trade-enabling infrastructure. That's going to mean a more competitive and rationalized tax environment. It's going to mean a big push to lower red tape and regulatory burden from all levels of government. That's going to make our goods more competitive in Canada, in North America, but in some of those export markets where we hope to grow.
No, good. Wonderful. You also mentioned that I do want to get to a de minimis question with you, but before I do, you mentioned that 16% of businesses have relocated down to the United States, production down to the United States. Is this? Are they suggesting this is lost for good? Is this a temporary measure? I guess what's the thought process of some of these businesses that have done that?
Sure. So just to clarify, the 16% was from a survey we did earlier in the summer. And that was of members who had some level of production capacity already in the U.S. And it wouldn't be uncommon for companies that have production in all three markets to adjust as needed based on a number of factors. And so what we were trying to gauge is based on the immediate sort of threats and tariff barriers, how were we seeing? In short, I think we don't have sort of sub questions on that 16%. Anecdotally, what we've heard is in the short term, there was the thought that some of that production could be retained. It could come back to Canada. These are large facilities that have the ability to manage. Our concern over the long term is if there are permanent reallocations of capital or investment in facilities to fit up, that it'll be much harder to repatriate some of that production. So in the short term, we're not as concerned. In the long term, the longer the uncertainty persists, we have concerns about repatriating that production.
Okay, and then about 20 seconds, Madam
yes.
Chair. Perfect. So do you think Canada should respond to the elimination of the de minimis measure?
We don't have a strong point of view on that, given most of our members are not selling, small shipments or measures. It's industrial inputs at a larger scale, so no real strong view on that one.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Lavoie for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question is for Mr. Greer. Mr. Greer, the de minimis is an area I'm familiar with. I worked in banks, including in the Beauce region, where my colleague across the way, where there are a lot of manufacturing plants, where I worked for 4 years in the Beauce. And I worked a lot with manufacturers. And indeed, I would like to make a comment on your survey that you conducted, that you mentioned earlier, as to whether they were ready to accept 5% or 10% tariffs. I was a bit surprised that the answer was not 0. I don't know any business that is ready to accept the tariffs to be paid, because each percentage point is important to them. So that being said, we're talking about large amounts that manufacturers have to invest in their manufacturing chains or lines. They have to remain competitive and increase their productivity. And earlier, you talked about 6, 7, or 8 demands that were very laudable and are important. However, we are in an exceptional context. Everyone has gone through, we've asked questions. Some people have 50 years of experience and have never seen this. And as you know, I was a banker, and foreseeability for businesses that invest a lot, the bankers are concerned about that. It's very important in the context where we don't have that foreseeability, and the risk over the next 3 years with our neighbor to the south, foreseeability no longer exists. What is your viewpoint? What is the advice? What are the needs for manufacturers to be assisted to get through this crisis and continue to grow and to continue to be competitive, while keeping in mind that foreseeability will perhaps not return in the medium to long term?
Very much for your question. On the first point around accepting a tariff, I'll use more precise language. The exact question that we asked is, at what level of tariff would your business no longer be competitive? So we weren't asking about acceptability. We were just saying, based on how your business is functioning and operating, at what level of tariff would you be competitive? And so that's not an easy question for them to answer. So happy to clarify that. In terms of the business environment, if this level of unpredictability continues over the medium and long term, and certainly that is a possibility, I think there's a few things. One, I've referenced it before, but there needs to be a great deal of more urgency, I would say, under the policies that Canada does control. We are hopeful. There was a big push and a lot of noise around interprovincial trade barriers and mutual recognition in the first half of this year. We understand a lot of that work is still continuing bilaterally between the provinces. I haven't seen or heard as much urgently communicated about how they're rushing to knock down these barriers. We're hopeful that work continues and continues on an accelerated basis. As I've mentioned before, in terms of unpredictability, there's ways around tax incentives, regulatory burden, red tape that we think could really help incentivize investment and help lower some of the risk in other areas where manufacturers will continue to see it on the trade front. But in sort of broad strokes, I mean, the most important thing we can do is to try to reach a good deal, not any deal, but a good deal with the U.S., both bilaterally and then, of course, through the CUSMA process. I know there have been some who have advocated a patient approach and to let the political process south of the border play out. I would imagine those are maybe coming from sectors that are less directly affected than manufacturing has been. It's some 60,000 jobs lost between January and August in the manufacturing sector. I expect we'll see an increase to that number here in the weeks ahead. Our view is that we can't or should do everything in our power that is reasonable and fair to not let that uncertainty persist, at least as it relates to the current tariffs and the CUSMA agreement for, as long as you were speculating.
Malheureusement, pour l'imprévisibilité.
Unfortunately, for foreseeability, this is part of the things that we cannot control, but I'm happy to have heard that you're pleased with interprovincial barriers being abolished for trade. And I have less than 30 seconds, Mr. Max, just briefly. It's still Women's Month, and you're talking about SMEs, in particular women and young people. Why?
Our industry is historically one, a lot of women come into entrepreneurship through our industry. Some of them stay there. In other cases, they get a taste for entrepreneurship. They go on to open their own store, create their own products, build their own business. We call it an on-ramp to entrepreneurship. So it's a very important stepping stone to give those people, those women, a taste of getting into that and then moving on to something that can continue to create even more dividends for the Canadian economy.
Merci.
Okay, thank you very much. Under Mr. Bonan for 2.5 minutes, please.
Madame la Présidente. Monsieur Greer, j'ai vu que
Mr. Greer, I saw that in fact, based on the Woodrow Institute, it seems to say that Mr. Trump might want to, that the first review for CUSMA, it would in fact go to more reviews, which would become annuals, if there is no signature, so that we can just extend this agreement on a longer period. And based on him, it would allow the United States to regularly, wrench concessions from Canada and Mexico. So if the U.S. refuse to extend this agreement over several years, do you fear that these reviews would become annual, that they would become normalized as annual reviews, which brings to more uncertainty?
I mean, the preferred outcome of the CUSMA process from our perspective would, of course, be that parties agree to renew the agreement in 2026, even if that involves some very hard discussions and trade-offs to try to get more certainty. This rolling annual sort of review reevaluation process in which parties could try to sort of solicit or extract new concessions, I don't think is good for manufacturing investment and uncertainty. I think we would expect that to be borne out in how our members would invest in their business and, frankly, how manufacturers in the U.S. would also make decisions. The whole, U.S., whether you agree with it or not, I think the working theory by many of the people pushing the pro-tariff policy in Washington, D.C. is that if there's long-term certainty that tariffs will persist, that then manufacturers will make investments to get behind that tariff wall. If there is not long-term certainty that it will remain, then manufacturers will not be incentivized to make those investments in the U.S. So I expect that uncertainty would not just impact manufacturers in this country, but it would also severely impact manufacturers in the U.S. as well, and Mexico.
Et rapidement sur l'harmonisation des normes.
And quickly, when we're talking about the alignment of the standards, just to come back to this, do you have recommendation regarding the alignment, whether it's for aeronautic, aerospace, anything like this?
To say there was a chapter negotiated in CUSMA around good regulatory practices that has not been used. You may recall there used to be the Regulatory Cooperation Council, which is some work that I participated in among other industry folks, where Canadian and American regulators would gather in Ottawa and D.C. and address very specific sectoral ways to align. Frankly, just restarting a process for those discussions to happen on a more proactive and ongoing basis would be beneficial. I'm not sure it'll be realistic in the short term, but if we can get some sort of certainty around CUSMA, we believe that chapter could be used to start productively having discussions again about running the opposite direction, which is how do we make it more cost competitive to manufacture and build things in North America to compete against the rest of the world instead of what we're doing now, which is, of course, introducing more cost and uncertainty.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Chambers, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Maddox, I got a question for you, at least one anyway. On the de minimis rules, like you mentioned that in your opening, I believe, is that your members selling items underneath the value to Americans, or how does those rules affect your members?
So de minimis effects going both ways over the
Okay.
border. So we have members who are US-based companies who, even though the individual seller of that product is in Canada, the product is shipped from a distribution center somewhere in the US into Canada. So they take advantage of Canada's current de minimis rules. So they're very supportive of obviously that happening, and that when they sell to that consumer in Canada, there's someone in Canada, a little entrepreneur who's making some commission off that sale. In the other direction, we obviously have Canadian companies who ship into the US market.
Sure.
And have taken advantage of that CUSMA exemption in the past. Interestingly, going back to last time we negotiated, or NAFTA 2.0 as we were calling it then, the US wanted everybody to go up to $800 as a de minimis level. They wanted a higher de minimis level for everybody. Now they've taken it back to zero, which is quite a change. So obviously our members who are in Canada now, if they want to ship into the US, and they have to collect duties on every single delivery that's going down there. There's quite a lot of paperwork to look at. CUSMA compliance can get you around that, but CUSMA compliance is not a silver bullet that works for everybody. And a lot of our members are global companies, so they have products that are manufactured with ingredients from various different markets. So CUSMA compliance really doesn't come into play there either.
So you would say it's important as part of the negotiation to deal with the de minimis rule, and you would like to go back to what it was, is what I assume?
We would like to have an equivalent rule between the three CUSMA nations.
You don't want ours to go down, though, do you?
No. So, I mean, it's difficult because us having a CUSMA exemption and them not is punishing Canadian companies because now US companies get an advantage coming into the Canadian market that they don't get going into the US market. So ideally it's an equivalent. Beyond that, and it may be a forlorn hope that we're going to negotiate that with the US, but I think it's definitely worth a try.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn over to my colleague, Jacob.
Mr. Greer, has the Canadian government, in the process of the current CUSMA public consultation, directly proactively reached out to the Canadian manufacturers and exporters to seek your opinion on this review?
We've had several discussions with the department and with staff. So I think some of that has been at our request, but some of it's
When
been
were
at
those
their
discussions?
request. Mostly over the last sort of, 3-4 months in preparation for the current review, but we'd started engaging with the government around the 2026 review as long as sort of 12 to 18 months ago.
Understood. You mentioned in your remarks that the longer this process goes on, the worse it is for your members because of the sectoral tariffs that are currently in place on steel, aluminum, and autos. How much longer can your members wait for a deal?
It varies depending on whether you're directly or indirectly impacted. But, we're having calls every day with members, certainly those that are being hit by 232s, including some who just in the last, as I mentioned, sort of month and a half have been hit by the new derivative 232 tariffs. We know that Commerce is undertaking that process again this fall, and so there will be more members caught up in that. For those who all of a sudden 50% of their business is being hit with 50% tariff, it's been fairly hard and devastating. There are some who are being hit less directly, so their U.S. customer are ordering less simply because their business is soft because of tariffs, even if everything they ship south is CUSMA exempt. They've got a little more runway, but even for them, they're all trying to do long-term planning in the best interest of their business and their employees. And it's incredibly difficult. We were in a scenario where it looked like sort of 232 relief was imminent, or there may have been deals this summer and heading through the summer and into the fall, and even as recently as this week's APEC summit. So, the manufacturing sector has been hanging on, sort of hoping for relief sooner rather than later. We know that these are very difficult, challenging, and complex negotiations, to say the least, but we are very hopeful that we can get some 232 relief as soon as possible.
Would you consider it urgent for your members to get deals on sectoral tariffs?
Yes.
Last question, in the last 30 seconds I have. You mentioned briefly about remission process. I noted in one of your studies that over 56% of your members couldn't figure out if they were eligible for remission under the current process. Is that process working for your members, or is it not?
It's been challenging, although I will say from the point of that survey, which was taking place at the beginning of the summer, the remissions process was very new to many of our members. They had never had to participate in it. The government was, I think, struggling with certain resourcing to handle the volume. But there are broadly, I think, still some challenges in that, very onerous requests and follow-up requests for additional information, and then slow turnaround timelines for the actual remission. We think there's still room to improve on both of those things.
Thank you very much. On to Madame Lapointe.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Alors, bienvenue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Maddox, I have questions. You said earlier that you said it was 84% of women. How many members do you have?
Members are the companies who these people work for. So we have 60 member companies which represent a large percentage of the direct selling companies that operate in Canada. But each of those member companies may have as many as 20, 30,000 people who are in communities all across Canada. For instance, the Mary Kay lady who would be in every small town in Canada. So that's where the percentage of women that I was discussing comes from. And realistically, a lot of the products sold through the direct selling channel are products that are marketed toward females, and that's why that sort of mix has come about. But shout out to the 16% of men also who are working in the direct selling space as well. But yeah, so even though our membership is the direct selling companies, we do feel a responsibility, obviously, to operate in the best interests and work in the best interests of the people who are working for them as independent sales consultants. Who are those people?
Merci. Tantôt, vous avez...
Thank you. Earlier, you also said that there was an experience of entrepreneurship in people who are interested, and sometimes it helps them start their businesses. But what I want to talk about instead is, the electronic trade. Is there a possibility of increase across the boundary when we're talking about electronics?
Talking about, online sales, social media, those sorts of things. Obviously, our membership has jumped on social media a lot and utilize social media tools a lot to market their products and talk about the companies that they're working with. One of the beauties of social media, but also the challenges, is that it doesn't recognise international borders. So that has been very good for many of our independent sellers because they are able to, someone might be in Manitoba and have friends in North Dakota, and they can introduce them to a product, and that person in North Dakota buys the product and the person in Canada makes a commission on it, which shows you that in the direct selling world and in the social media world, there really are no borders, and that sort of speaks to some of the challenges our members are facing with these current trade discussions, in that there is a push, I guess, for harder borders, and electronic media and online sales don't tend to recognise that.
Est-ce que vous recommanderiez
Another question, would you recommend specific changes to the numeral chapter of the agreement with the United States and Mexico?
In general, we've been pretty pleased with how things have operated under the current agreement. Not being a trade guru to the level of Mr. Greer, I don't know every clause in it, but we have not had complaints over the last 6 to 7 years with the current CUSMA agreement. What I would turn back to is the point that I think Canada's in a position. Our industry is typically one of entrepreneurs, where we just want the government, as long as consumers are protected and as long as people are protected, we want the government to some degree get out of the way and let our entrepreneurs do what they're doing. So I would like to speak to the really great opportunity for Canada to lower some of those barriers to investment, whether that's getting products regulated. I talked a little bit about Health Canada in my opening remarks. And is there an opportunity to create avenues whereby people can get products regulated, they can get them to market more quickly, and that can incent Canadian companies to start manufacturing in Canada and to selling products in Canada as well. So as I mentioned, I think for us it's about how do we lower barriers rather than how do we change the rules.
In regard to these regulations, do you think that the measure for protecting consumers should be aligned among the three countries? I guess that's two questions. Is there a risk for disloyal competition if there isn't an agreement by Canada to agree to this?
Is good in theory, but be careful what you wish for with harmonisation, because sometimes it harmonises to a code or a level that our particular country might not be comfortable with. If we speak about the regulation of natural health products, for instance, Canada has a high level of regulation for health products. We love that. It speaks to the success of our companies in Canada and the level of ethics and that they work to. The US tends to have a lower level of regulation of health products. So we want to keep it at that level. Obviously, if there was a way to bring the US up to that level, that would be good. But I think there are ways that we can, based on risk, there are ways that we can lower the regulatory barriers for companies so that we focus on either higher risk products or higher risk operations, and then free up those lower risk products to be sold more quickly, often while they're on trend. If a company wants to introduce a natural health product, sometimes it can take them in Canada 12 to 18 months to get that approved at a regulatory level. And in that time, that product the ingredients in that product might not be on trend anymore for people in the natural health space. So, and meanwhile, they've been selling it in the US and Mexico for the last 12 to 18 months. So that's definitely a challenge that we would like to see overcome.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to our witnesses. We appreciated your information, and we also recognize the challenges that you're facing, and that Canada's working very hard, and your committee is working very hard and listening very closely. So I will suspend for a few minutes while we bring up our other witnesses, please. With us this afternoon for the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, Corrine Pullman, Executive Vice President, Advocacy, and Michelle Auger, Director, Trade and Marketplace Competitiveness, National Affairs, and Sherry Clearman, Hamel Limited, David Hamel, Operation Manager, and Quebec International, we have Carl Viel, President and Chief Executive Officer by video conference, and Emile Limon, Senior Economist by video conference. So glad to see everybody's online and ready to go. Miss Pullman, would you like to go first, please?
Sure. So good afternoon. My name is Corinne Pullman. I'm the Executive Vice President for the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. I'm joined with my colleague Michelle, who is the Director of Trade and Marketplace Competitiveness. We'd like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to be here today. As many of you may know, CVB is a nonpartisan, not-for-profit organization representing more than 100,000 small and medium-sized companies across Canada and across every industry and region of the country. We're here to share a small business perspective on North American trade as we approach the first joint review of CUSMA. The cost of doing business, you must know, is at an all-time high due to rising taxes, rent, insurance, other operating expenses, as well as increasing regulatory and compliance burdens. And the ongoing trade uncertainty between Canada and the U.S. has created another layer of instability. Many small firms, the tariffs have meant higher costs and tighter margins, which is why it's really no surprise that 2/3 of our members believe that Canada should be moving quickly with the Canada-U.S.-Mexico Agreement review. Now, prior to the trade war, just over half of small businesses were directly engaged in trade with the United States, and thousands more were engaged indirectly through suppliers or clients. Given the uncertainty, cost pressures, supply chain disruptions, and other impacts on small businesses, 92% of Canadian small businesses believe Canada should strengthen its trade ties with other countries besides China and the United States. In fact, we've already seen about 1/3 of small businesses either fully or partially pivoting away from the United States as a trading partner. However, we must be realistic. Most still conduct some trade with the United States, and so it remains important for Canada and the U.S. to have a stable relationship, which is best done through an agreement like the Canada-U.S.-Mexico Agreement. Now, the CUSMA Agreement provides a valuable framework that can help smaller businesses navigate and maintain stability across North American markets. However, a number of challenges continue to limit the ability of small firms to take advantage of the agreement. For example, many small firms are struggling to navigate through the ongoing tariffs. There is a lack of clarity around when and how additional duties apply and to which products, leaving many businesses unable to plan with confidence. Beyond tariffs, the cost of shipping goods and currency fluctuations pose additional barriers. While business owners understand that trade involves certain costs, many do not anticipate the numerous barriers that create unnecessary bottlenecks and extra costs in the process. So I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague Michelle to some of the details of some of those barriers.
Great. Thanks, Corinne. So while tariff and direct costs continue to pose significant challenges for small businesses, many are also struggling with non-tariff barriers that limit their ability to trade effectively with U.S. and Mexico. So barriers such as the complex licensing rules, complex customs procedure, regulatory differences, and other administrative requirements often make it difficult for small businesses to fully benefit from CUSMA. There's a need for better coordination amongst all government departments, agencies, and those involved in trade. Businesses often face overlapping requirements, unclear communication, and lack of responsiveness when seeking clarification on cross-border issues. And so for small firms, even though short delays or lack of guidance, those can have major financial consequences. Another challenge lies in the rules of origin and ensuring that products are CUSMA compliant. For many SMEs, determining and proving origin is an extremely technical process that can vary depending on the product's composition, supplier documentation. And so all this adds an uncertainty for small businesses that are importing components or raw material before they're exporting that final product. The result is that many SMEs simply avoid cross-border trade altogether because of the risk of non-compliance or the administrative burden involved. Also, SMEs are struggling with the rollout of CBSA's new CARM portal. Its financial guarantee requirements are often inaccessible for many small firms, and the platform itself remains difficult to navigate. The loss of the U.S. de minimis threshold has also been particularly difficult for small exporter, which essentially removes an important cost and paperwork advantage that help facilitate low-value shipments into the U.S. Labor mobility is a key concern. While CUSMA was meant to ease some of the temporary movement of professionals across the border, many small firms continue to encounter inconsistent interpretations of the rules at port of entries. The uncertainty adds time, cost, risk for many SMEs trying to send staff and service providers to their U.S. clients. So in short, reducing regulatory misalignment, simplifying border processes, and improving communication between government and businesses would go a long way in helping SMEs succeed in North American trade. Historically, we've seen that trade agreements really reflect more the priorities of large firm, and while small businesses, which make up 98% of all Canadian businesses, have been underrepresented. So while CUSMA takes an important step forward by including a dedicated SME chapter that called for information sharing platforms and an SME committee and digital trade supports, there's still a lot of room to do more to help small businesses navigate trade in North America. So as we approach the review, we urge that a small business land be applied across all relevant chapters of the agreement, so there's a focus on the needs of small businesses, not just in one key chapter of the agreement, but throughout the entire agreement. Chapters such as rules of origin, custom administration, trade facilitation, and digital trade are just a few that could include sort of the small business land to really help small business navigate the agreement. We thank you for your time today, and we look forward to answer any of your questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hamill, please, for up to 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, et merci tous les membres.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the committee members for giving me the opportunity to talk to you about our reality, about what we experience on a daily basis in the lumber industry. My name is David Hamel, and I am the Director of Operation at Clermont Hamel Limited, a family business established in Saint-Ephrem-de-Beauce for more than 105 years ago. I am part of the 5th generation to work there, along with my sister France and my brother Nicolas. Our story began in 1890 with my great-great-grandfather, who operated a small sawmill powered by the village river. Today, we have grown into a large modern sawmill with an annual production of 150 million board feet of lumber, 100% of which come from private forest sources. We produce wood that is used in homes, businesses, and infrastructure across the country. This represents approximately 4,000 truckload of finished product each year, not counting wood chips, sawdust, shavings, and bark, which represent an equal amount. We employ more than 140 people, many of whom have been with us for 30, 40, even 50 years. These are passionate workers, deeply committed to their profession and the region. Around them, 100 indirect jobs also depend on our activity. Over the years, we have constantly invested in technology, automation, and training to remain the best, and so we can be leaders in our field. Today, we are going through an extremely difficult period. Since August 9th, the tariffs imposed by the United States on Canadian timber have skyrocketed. We have gone from 14% to more than 35% in duties and tax, and since October 14th, an additional 10% has been added. In concrete terms, we now pay 45% in taxes to export on timber. And I said we because in the lumber industry, it is the exporter that pays the AD and CVD tax. So the Trump tax. The result, a company like ours, which was still making profit in July, became loss-making overnight. Before this increases, half of our production went to the United States. Today, we export barely 5%. So we have fallen back on the Canadian market, but all our competitors have done the same thing, with the result that the Canadian market is now flooded with timber. Prices are falling, and the situation is getting worse every week. In 3 months, the price of a 2x4 in Canada has fallen from $291 to $260, a 12% drop, but our costs continue to rise. Forestry in Canada accounts for 495,000 direct and indirect jobs combined. The forestry GDP is 34 billion and export are 45 billions. In Canada, our sawmills are among the most efficient in North America. Nearly 95% of them are already highly modernized and equipped with state-of-the-art technology. We don't need loans to become more productive. We already are. And that would only make things worse. What we need is breathing room. We need to be able to breathe at a time when the pressure is becoming unbearable. And this is where the government can really make a difference. It must make us independent from the United States. It should give us back the money from the counter tariff it imposed this year. We must stop saying that there is a housing shortage in Canada and ensure that we build more homes and build them out of woods while rewarding those who use wood in construction. All construction or renovation of public building must be in wood. Another way to help us would be to reduce cost at the source in harvesting, transportation, and energy. This would allow sawmills to have better supply costs. It could also negotiate a different agreement with the United States for mills that source 100% of their supply from private forests, as was done from 2006 to 2015, because the cost of supply is higher than for those sourcing from public forests. Madam Chair, lumber is not just an export product, it is a source of national pride, a unique skill, and the economic heart of many regions like ours. If nothing is done, a whole part of our industrial history is in danger of disappearing. And with it, thousands of workers who have given everything to their job. The bottom line is that we cannot sustain financial loss for much longer. We need help quickly. The Canadian market is flooded with wood, so prices are falling every week. The Canadian market is not consuming all the timber produced, so we need to stimulate timber consumption and quickly. We must act now. Thank you.
Mr. Vail, please, for up to 5 minutes.
Madame la Présidente, Mesdames, Messieurs, chers membres.
Mesdames et Messieurs, chers membres du comité, ladies and gentlemen, dear committee members, and dear chair, thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. I just wanted to remind you of my position. So as a leading partner of Regional Economic Development Agency, Québec International facilitates and support business growth and accelerate their success in Quebec, in Canada, and internationally, all with a focus of sustainability. As the Economic Development Agency for the Quebec City region, we support businesses in attracting and retaining international workers and students. We prospect for foreign investment, and we support technological entrepreneurship, export and marketing, and the development of sector of strengths, all for the benefit of our ecosystem. In 2024, in a context marked by uncertainty and a slowdown of the Quebec economy, our team supported 177 projects and more than 1,800 businesses and organizations, generating $1.34 billion in economic spin-offs in investment in the region, the third consecutive years above the billion-dollar mark. As the Regional Export Promotion Organization, which we are known ORPEX, for the Capital National Region, Québec International offers local frontline services to SMEs to facilitate their international development. For over 150 years, the supply chain has been interconnected between Canada and the United States. With a North American Free Trade Agreement, it is common for raw materials from one country to be processed and assembled in another, then sold in a third. Today, U.S. tariffs imposed by United States are at the highest level since the 1930s. This situation has a tangible impact on the approximately 800 exporters of the Quebec City region, particularly those directly affected by this tariff measure. In response, Quebec International, in collaboration with several partners, has organized events specifically focused on market diversification. In June 2025, 92% of Canadian export in the United States still crossed the border without being subject to tariffs. And this was largely due to CUSMA. The U.S. market is crucial for Quebec City businesses. There is every reason to believe that the U.S. will remain their main international trading partner, given its geographical proximity and the size of its market. The market access made possible by the agreement is beneficial for the development of local businesses, but also serves as a strong argument for attracting foreign subsidiaries to the region, which contribute to our economic development. However, in the current context, diversification is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. To successfully develop new markets with other international partners and within Canada, SMEs need support, sometimes financial, but above all, personalized guidance. Successfully penetrating a market outside Quebec takes time, approximately 2 years, and it requires significant resources and efforts. So it is essential to support organizations such as Quebec International that assist this company with our contact, network, and knowledge of different markets. We can provide adequate support to companies, particularly SMEs, to help them succeed. Our activities generate significant benefit for the regional economy. In 2024, our foreign market development team supported 50 new exporting companies, and the various export and marketing activities generated economic benefits of $26 million. So 3 key messages: train and support businesses, particularly in their market diversification. So intensify support for organizations such as ORPEX and Quebec International to equip SMEs in their market diversification and strategic use of CUSMA. 2, give SMEs a voice, include all sectors, and above all, include the perspective of Quebec SMEs during consultation to ensure that their needs are considered during the joint review of CUSMA.
Interrupt. We
Cut
need to
you.
get, the members have many questions, right? So
Perfect.
thank you very much. I'm sure you'll be able to get the remainder of your testimony in with those questions. All right, Mr. Groslo, please.
Madame la Présidente, chers invités, bonjour. Monsieur Hamel, Siri Claire.
So, Mr. Hamel, so you work in the forestry area in Quebec. Vous êtes in a business in one of the most beautiful regions of Canada, which is, once again, the Beauce, and I love to say that. So, Saint-Ephrem is a small village from our region, a very proud village. Just to mention that Mr. Hamel and his family are very generous and committed to their community, and I want to congratulate you, Mr. Hamel. Now, so let's talk about those tariffs. 45%, that's what they are in your area. That's really important. What are the impacts in your business? You talked about it, but I mean, who's paying for those tariffs?
De plusieurs personnes pensent
Just to be nuanced here, many people think that those tariffs are paid by Americans, but in our area, it has always been the exporters who paid the tariffs. So when we cross with a truck that has wood in it, we are the one writing the check. So we have to add 45%. So for $20,000 shipment, you have $9,000 tariffs. So imagine your margin wasn't 45%. So the reality is that you're basically selling at a loss at the moment. Yes, as it is right now, the Canadian market is adjusting to the American market. You know, there are many changes. So if the price is increasing on the American market, the Canadian market is going to increase as well. But the tax is not taken into consideration in that. So see, for example, wood is $500 in the US. It will be a little more expensive in Canadian because we have to take the exchange rate into consideration. But with the tariff, I mean, I'm sorry, like it's not enough. You talked about your percentage of export, which is 50% for your business, but it's the same for many businesses in Canada. And now you're down to 5%. And now you're flooding the Canadian market. So what's happening now?
buys.
Every week, the price is coming down. We know that as it is, the Canadian market is still taking a little bit, but I mean, we're coming toward winter. We are very worried about what's going to happen because construction is going to slow down everywhere because of winter in Canada. We can go back to the American market, but it's not true that we're going to be able to sell, that much wood to be able to pay 45% in tariffs. Earlier, you said that you don't need more money to become more productive. What did you mean by that? So this is a very interesting topic. The sawmill nowadays, they've really automated absolutely everything. We are leaders in Canada. We are the best makers for all the machinery that is used in Quebec. We're really good at this. So even if we received money to become more productive, all we're going to do is more wood. And we're just going to flood the market even more. Where we need help, is we need to find ways to lower our production cost. Adding a new line is not going to help us that much. We're just going to have more wood. As I was saying, what we need to do is like lower the cost of energy, for example. Why is diesel more expensive in Quebec than in Canada? Maybe with electricity, we could also have some help in the way that we are going to find this in the forest. We are a sector where we are consuming a lot of diesel in the forest for transport to the plant and transport to the client. So we are a very large volume product, but low value.
Mr. Hamel, a little while ago, you said producing Canadian wood for Canadian buildings. This is an extraordinary sentence, stimulates the economy. What do you mean by this? Well, in the crisis that we went through in between, I guess it was 2008 to 15, I think it was, there had been some programs that the government had come up with in order to help the forestry sector. And that's what it was in Quebec in any case. I don't know if it was the rest of Canada, but it really, all hospitals and everything had to be built out of wood. That was a real push for it. And that's something else I think we should do. Maybe that is the case. I don't know. But I just wanted to talk about it. In Quebec, you can put up to 18 stories in a building made out of wood, as well as in Ontario and in BC. Other provinces are still limited to 12 stories. And I think also, if these are prefabricated modules, we could put up entire buildings in record time. And of course, but we could produce this easily. No, you have no problem with production. No, not at all. But we are going to need help in order to be able to coach the companies, who are used to making buildings in another way. So we really need to stimulate the economy this way. I think you could make an entire building in the space of a week. Now, you've also said that 490,000 jobs in Canada. So compared to, if you could compare to aluminium, for instance, the Liberal government was always talking about steel and automobile. How come they never talk about wood? How come they never talk about forests? I don't know, hard to say. But I think that they like to concentrate on things that are important for big cities. I mean, I don't know. But it seems that little villages are kind of forgotten by the wayside, Thank you very much.
La présidente,
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a couple of questions. One for Mr. Hamel, one Mr. Viel. I know you. We're both from Quebec City. We've worked actually together when I was in my previous position at the Trade Board. And do you remember that during 4 years that I was there, I kept saying that governments should offer predictability to companies. And here we are a year later, and I repeat this, I say this often, it's so difficult to have predictability, isn't it? That's a hard word to pronounce, actually. And it's hard to give predictability to our businesses. So my question is, in the present day context for businesses, and you are in Quebec City, you're in my riding, as a matter of fact, and there's a couple of things. What is your vision when it comes to that lack of predictability? And secondly, the government has said that they wanted to double exports to the US and go rather than the US go to Europe. What do you think of this? Thank you for asking this question. First of all, I'll start with the second question because it's a really important one. And it's inviting businesses to diversify. And this is a long haul in terms of work. But you don't ever put all your eggs in one basket, just like you wouldn't at the stock market. So it's important to help businesses diversify. And it was mentioned by other people today that our commerce is so integrated with the United States and our procurement and everything is that it's going to take time to change that. And what is also underestimated is that sometimes it's a lot more expensive to export from east to west within Canada. So we really need to improve our distribution network in Canada. And concerning your first question concerning predictability, that is hugely important. All businesses do investments on the short, medium, and the long term, and we know that things evolve. So predictability, yes, I have a hard time pronouncing that as well, but we need to support it, and we need to make sure that we have to, where they can, in terms of knowledge, it's easier to predict. Thank you, Mr. Ahmed. I actually know your business quite well, and because I was actually in forestry myself until I was a lumberman myself until I was 25 years old, and I come from a family of lumberjacks, and I worked at a bank that financed businesses such as yours. So I understand what it is you're going through. So you want investments from government, from Canada. And when we're talking about building Canada, build Canada homes, that must really speak to you, because all these there's supposed to be so many construction projects going. We're talking even about a generational, we're talking about the Buy Canada Act. So all of this is very strong, and this speaks to you, does it not? Yes, we often hear that there is a lack of housing, but I ask myself how it's going to be solved. Are people going to be helped? Because yes, we know that we have to build, and we have to build out of wood, but is the entrepreneur going to carry all the risk by himself? Are they going to be sure that they can rent out what it is that they're building? But it seems to me that things should be a little clearer when it comes to the building, as in order to be able to stimulate, in order for us to be able to use all the wood that we produce. Well, it is enough, and there are programs we've put in $1 billion in the provincial, and we are helping here to finance this, and also the modular houses. Things you said, as you said, this is built very, in Rimouski, they built a modular building within 10 months. So we can really see those investments. But do you think that this is a good decision? Do you think that we should be continuing to go into that? Yes, and to remove intra-provincial barriers? Yes. There's not a lot of barriers between the provinces, but we usually go to the corridor between Ontario and New Brunswick. With the US, of course, they were really close by, and that was a very attractive market, of course. But to persist in wanting to sell to the US, well, let's just try and consume our own wood here. I think that'll be better. Anyway, eventually they'll want to buy our wood anyway.
Mon Dieu, excusez-moi.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. I thought I had 5 minutes. I do apologize. But I did have another question for Ms. Pullman. How is this going to affect small and medium-sized businesses, the fact that the government wants to remove intra-provincial barriers? Because we're talking about 200 billion here. How do you think this is going to affect SMEs?
Momentum en ce moment.
Well, there's a huge momentum right now, and we've seen the reduction of these interprovincial barriers. We'd like to see more action. We'd like this to happen a whole lot faster, because things are a bit slow, but things are starting to move somewhat between the provinces.
Mr. Bonan, please, for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Bell, I'd like to check something with you. Do you consider that Quebec SMEs have been sufficiently involved and consulted with the joint review of CUSMA? Have you been contacted to participate and express your concerns? Well, with regard to your question, this consultation was done through different participants, like the Federation of boards of trade commerce boards, and there have been consultations. There's been questionnaires in order to be able to express our opinions and the businesses, Quebec businesses concerned. And the second thing that comes out of this is that our SMEs are often led by men and women, and we need to be able to help them and support them throughout this process. So this is part of the job that we do every day. We inform them, we accompany them so that they are best able to be in a high state of performance. Are there any improvements that you'd like to see in this joint process review? Not necessarily with regards to the process, but there are elements that have been mentioned by other people. For instance, like the mini-me that has an impact, and everything that has to do with export tariffs. We didn't have them before, but now since these tariffs, can go very high. And the second element, which was also mentioned by someone, was to make sure that we take into account the ease of professional mobility. This is something that we saw during Mr. Trump's first mandate. So let's say somebody wanted to send their employees in the US, they had problems. So that's something that could help. And another thing that we wanted to draw your attention to had to do with calls for tender. I want to make a parallel. For instance, we have an agreement with Europe, and we realized that when we see that Canadian companies were not able really to profit as or benefit as easily from these call for tenders as Europeans. So this is the reason why we need consultations, because we have to figure out how we can adjust these call for tenders within the context of the joint review. Do you think that the Canadian government is doing enough when it comes to deployment and looking for new markets? We are lucky in Canada because we do have several partners. We have Europe, we have Asia. But we're so used to working in that north, south, way of doing things, and our supply chains are so integrated. It's so much easier to get contracts with the US, and getting new markets is longer and more complex. It takes time. Have we maximized all of our agreements with our other partners? Perhaps not. I think there's still some room for improvement, and it could take different forms. In the next few months, we're going to be increasing our number of trade missions, going to different territories. But even, let's say, on the French market, we have businesses that are going to help our business leaders to properly communicate. We may speak the same language, but we sometimes use different terms and different vocabulary. So it's important to take the time to help our businesses, but nothing's going to happen overnight. And especially when it comes to new markets and new contracts.
Merci d'être là.
Mr. Ahmed, thank you so much for being here. And of course, this situation is rather worrisome for you. Thank you for giving us the context of what's going on. Do you think right now, especially if we compare it to other sectors, like steel or the automobile, do you think that forestry is sufficiently supported by the federal measures? Do you think that it needs more support? Well, we do feel a bit abandoned, and we have gotten some recent information, but it's rather opaque still. When we heard Mr. Carney negotiating, and he was talking about steel and cars and not wood. So we thought, well, we'll find out what's going on in Washington, but maybe it won't change anything. So, yeah, that's how we feel in forestry. But Mr. Carney had announced money, but when it's going to arrive, nobody knows.
Est-ce qu'une subvention, par exemple, salariale, un peu comme il y avait avec la COVID, ce serait
Do you think that some kind of a salary support like we had during COVID would help? Well, what I was told is that things might be better in the summer of 2026, and we have to somehow keep going. But with the losses that we're having, we're not going to last. So yeah, we need help quickly, however it comes. But yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Pullman, Ms. Auger, my questions will be directed at you. In your comments, you mentioned 2/3 of your members were hoping for a speedy review of CUSMA. I think the number was 68% in your report. I know we were all hoping for a deal by July 21st, and then hoping for a deal by August 1st. And now I understand there may not be any deals until the new year, if we can take the ambassador's word at that just this afternoon. So is the government proceeding as quickly or fast enough for your members?
Well, unpredictability, which has been talked about a lot here, is huge. And there are small businesses struggling dramatically right now. So the faster we can go to get some certainty, I think that's the key piece of this, is the better. So yeah, it is disappointing we are where we are. Some of this is out of the control of our own government, given that we're dealing with a U.S. president who can be, unpredictable in and of itself. But hopefully we'll see some progress coming soon and some predictability coming soon, whatever that looks like. But yeah, we'd like to see it move more quickly for sure.
So is it fair to say, Ms. Pullman, that a deal for your members is urgent?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you. You also mentioned in your comments that the cost of doing business has never been higher. And I understand that one of the additional costs your members have been paying, and in fact disproportionately paying as small and medium-sized businesses, are retaliatory surtaxes. Do you have any estimation or rough numbers for the committee on how much surtaxes your members have paid to the Canadian government?
We don't necessarily have a number, but we do know that it's among the most impactful of the tariffs that were imposed over the course of the last 8 months. When we look at the tariffs that have the biggest impact on our members both ways, they were right up there with the steel and aluminum tariffs. It was the Canadian counter tariffs were having the broadest impact among business owners. Whereas the sectoral tariffs are very specific to certain industries, the Canadian counter tariffs was very broad-based, so it hit a much larger component of the small business sector, and so that's why it had such a massive impact on so many businesses.
Right, and do you have any insight into what the government is doing with that money it collected from your members?
No, we don't. We know very little about where that's going. One of our biggest pieces of advice has been to return that money as quickly as possible and not make it complicated, make it as simple as possible. Many of those small businesses feel like they've put a lot of money into those tariffs, and they'd like to see some of that returned as they try to struggle through the machinations of what's going on right now. So no, other than there's some programs through the regional development agencies called the Regional Tariff Response Initiative, which was meant to be specifically for small companies. But what we're finding is that the RDAs are all doing different types of programs. They all have different criteria, and for many of them, the criteria actually don't even include small businesses. So, for example, in British Columbia, you have to have at least 10 employees. So if you have less than 10 employees, you're not going to be able to access it. If you're in Quebec, you have to be in manufacturing, and you have to have at least $2 million in revenues in the previous year, which excludes most smaller manufacturers in Quebec. So it's really not necessarily working, I think, in the way that it was intended.
Thank you. So do you think it would be helpful for this committee to seek further transparency on those surtaxes that were collected and what the government's going to do with them?
Absolutely. Understanding where the money is and where it's going to go would be helpful.
Excellent. Last question for you. You mentioned the Customs and Revenue Management System, a fairly infamous program now at this committee. In fact, so infamous that the U.S. Trade Representative has listed it as a trade irritant in its latest report. Would you consider it a trade irritant for your members?
Yeah, certainly is. When we look at border delays on the Canadian side, technological delays is what is the highest on the import side, right? So anything related to the technical system, which is CARM, is really what is slowing down the imports right now for a lot of small businesses. So while CARM is hindering their ability to import goods, it's also the RPP and the financial requirements that have shifted onto the small business owner, increasing their cost of doing business.
20 seconds for me.
In my last 20 seconds, I wanted to ask you, I understand that many small and medium-sized businesses and importers have thousands of dollars in surplus security currently with the CBSA because of the changes to the system with CARM. Should the government refund that surplus deposited money?
In fact, we navigated through this just last week with a small business owner who had something like $15,000 on his CARM account, couldn't get the money back. And so while he tried calling the help desk and managing it on his own, he was not getting anywhere, and we helped him navigate that process. And knock on wood, he'll get that check back soon. But it is one of the key issues with the portals, the refunds.
Good for you. All right. Madame Lapointe, please, for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and welcome to the witnesses and to the committee. Mr. Hamel, fifth generation, my goodness, what a congratulations. Not too many Quebec businesses can boast of having managed to get all the way to the fifth generation. I hope that you have lots more prosperity ahead of you. I know things aren't easy. A little while ago, you said, we would really like the US to really miss our wood. And according to your experience, how long do you think that it might take before they feel like they're really missing us and our wood? Because, you know, there's a huge hurricane coming, and I'm sure that the demand will increase just because of that. Well, that's a really good question. I'm not an economist, but I think maybe a couple of months, 2-3 months. Yeah, they're going to really miss our wood. Thank you.
Pas trop longtemps pour vous, là.
Well, I hope that's not too long for you.
J'ai des questions pour Monsieur Viel.
So I have a question for Mr. Vial. A little while ago, you talked about some trade missions, and I'd like to hear what you have to say about what you think are promising markets. As you know, we have several free trade agreements in different places, Asia, Europe, and the Mercosur countries. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for this question, Madame Lapointe. First of all, for us, the market that we're considering the most, because of our geography, of course, is Europe. And there are two advantages. First of all, it's easy to get there. And secondly, it's easy to work. Also, it can happen in other places too, but of course we have Canadian embassies there, and we have an opportunity of having Quebec delegations in Europe, and that also helps our businesses to get into contact rapidly with potential buyers or potential clients or distributors. Another thing that we take into account is that we have the opportunity, as you know, of we're dealing with French-speaking countries. So this also adds to ease. Next year, in May, we will have our third rendezvous for the Francophonie, and we will be working with our Francophone partners, because don't forget that there is a Francophone community all over Canada as well. And we must continue to work with them. We must be able to help our businesses to better export throughout Canada, and much effort has been made recently with the help of the federal government, as well as the provincial and territorial governments, to eliminate these intra-provincial trade barriers. And Mr. Hamel also said, as I say, we need to find businesses that want to export and diminish those export charges within Canada. Another thing is that, and I'll give you an example. We think about our entrepreneurs who might want to go somewhere like Asia or somewhere else. But when you're in Quebec, there's a lot of delay to get there compared to Vancouver, and travel comes into play. And also the way that to do business is different, or the way to do business in Africa is different. So these are things that we need to work at. And we also have to help our business leaders, entrepreneurs, to protect themselves when it comes to risk, when they're doing business or making agreements or sales elsewhere, because they need to be sure that they are paid. So these are all elements we need to take into consideration. We've seen in the past businesses that go on to certain markets and who didn't protect their intellectual property, and has consequences. So an upstream preparation is extremely important for all the entrepreneurs. Diversity is also a stability, and it's an opportunity for us to have several commercial agreements with different continents and different countries. Thank you so much. Thank you for having referred to the French language, because I was actually going to ask that. You've talked about a trade mission in the Francophone countries. Are you including, well, you know that French language, the highest progression of French-speaking countries is happening in Africa. Are you talking mostly to North Africa, West Africa? And as to your advice about preparing things, do you have any specific things to say for help? So the answer is yes. If the African market is in full expansion, and there are several countries through which we can have access to it, but like you said, it does need a lot of preparation work in order to be able to do business properly.
2.5 minutes, please.
Madame la Présidente,
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Ahmed, we were talking about help, like we got during COVID, to help employees, and we know that things are slowing down in the winter. It might be good to have something. What do you think of this idea? There are several measures that the Bloc is proposing. We were talking about a wood charter or a lumber charter for when it came to building and constructions, when it came to the building code, for instance, homes, like for Build Homes Canada. So there might be certain obligations to use wood, especially Quebec and Canadian wood. Do you think that this sort of measure might be of use?
Oui, ce sont
Yes, they would be useful, good measures. And we'd have to have adverts and communiques so that people are informed. But it is advantageous to build in wood. It's ecological, it's renewable.
Règlement des différends sur le bois d'œuvre.
Yeah, you do know about the wood, the lumber disputes. We know that things are very slow and inefficient in that regard. Yes, the last agreement, I think, was in 2015, and sometimes we hear that we're going to get money, but then we don't know. And right now, no money's come in from that latest agreement. Do you have any recommendations to make to improve the situation? Do you think they should hurry up? Or I don't know how these sorts of negotiations happen. I think it's really hard, really. And the American industry are the ones to motivate the American government to impose tax on it, because they think it's too expensive. So I think Canada should sell its wood at a higher price. I think that would be the first thing to do. From what I understand, when it comes to forest tariffs in Quebec, you would be actually losing market share when it comes to compared to wood producers in Europe. Could you repeat that? Well, with the tariffs that exist right now in Quebec, it would mean that European markets are taking shares. Well, here we are right beside them, and we're at 45% total. For Europe, I don't know, but I think it's like 10 or 15%. So obviously, Europe is in a better situation than us to go into the US market. And maybe we need to compromise with the American government. And so let's say for private forests, that would be a great way to resolve part of the problem, and they could sell. Madam Chair, I will continue. Mr. Ahmed, we were talking about rural areas and the lack of investment on the part of the Liberal government. And we need to be interested in rural areas. A little while ago, we were talking about cash flow because you mentioned the measures for productivity and the other one was a loan. But if we do nothing, how are we going to manage? Because we're talking about next year. Next year things will be better. But right now, what's going to happen into the regions? Yes, closures already started. We've seen them in Ontario. Some have been announced. A few are upcoming. Things are just beginning. The wave of closures is going to happen in November, December. That's when it's really going to happen. It can't continue. So we've talked about the price of wood, but the price of the actual logs hasn't gone down. You have to pay for a 2x4. Things have gone down. Yes. Oh yes. Yes. The raw material. We can't lower the price that we pay ourselves because it's so expensive to get it and to put it to bring it to the plant. And when we're using private forest, people, if we offer too low prices, they'd rather let the trees grow and not cut anything. Because some people have been looking at their forests for 50 years. So when they cut it, they want to get value for money. Well, when we're talking about fiber, we're talking about carbon tax, industrial carbon tax. Do you think that this is something that could actually help you for your cost? Yes, it might be substantial as a help because we pay the highest cost of energy. We pay the highest costs in Canada. Well, what kind of percentage are we talking about? In terms of percentage, I think 30. Are you talking about the difference in price? Okay, so diesel is 30 cents in difference. I don't know what it is in terms of percentage, but it's major. Yes. You'd need some help. Yes. Because we're not the only people, right? Because we've got the trucks that come in, the trucks that deliver, and then there's all the machinery inside of the forest, and they would really benefit from some help there. So without predictability, of course, things are difficult. And we know that costs are going up and down. How are you managing? Well, there are people who admire us because we're managing to do it because it's the only thing we know. And but this is our area. And we're keeping our fingers crossed that things are going to get better somehow. Okay, let's get into more technical details. I think it's important. In order to help you. So let's say we were to give you money, and then the perception of the Americans when it comes to that subsidies. So the subsidy would be to the person who's putting the wood straight into the sawmill. Do you know what I mean by that? Well, it mustn't be perceived as a subsidy. Yes. But I would say that whatever we do, it seems that they're always going to find some kind of fault with it. What do you mean? Well, I mean that anti-dumping and the CVDs, then they're going to say, oh, it's subsidies. But if us who are taking wood from private forest and there's no subsidies whatsoever, well, we'd still be seeing taxes everyone else. So you've talked about Canadian wood inside of Canadian buildings, and you've said that there's not enough information on this. I think that what you said is marvelous. What kind of solutions can you come up with? What is it that we need to be able to get through this? Well, we'd need advertising and training for all entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. To CFIB, I see that almost half of your members find that the U.S. is not a reliable trading partner at this time. And I thank your members because many of them have actually now looked to find domestic suppliers. Over 32% have found domestic suppliers, and that is a good thing for Canada. I know they're looking for that certainty that you're looking for, that everybody's looking for, that stability and predictability. But I also see that 92% want to diversify, believe in diversification. So I'm going to go into that a little bit, and I want to say through our trade commissioners' offices around the world, have your members been able to avail themselves of that opportunity and to expand, to scale up in terms of their business?
Well, I would say that our members are not aware of the Trade Commissioner Office. One, first and foremost, it's not something they even know it exists. Very few of our members do. We have surveyed on them multiple times over the years, and I think it's less than 5% even know what the Trade Commissioner Service does. So that's first problem. Second problem is even if they do know what it is, they don't necessarily feel that it's for them. And often when you go to the Trade Commissioner Service, you need to be of a certain type of industry or a certain type of development. And if you're not in that sort of category, the type of assistance they provide is not available to you. Thirdly, often we hear if somebody's just starting out in trade, they are being told that they should go to their provincial trade commissioners, not at the federal level. The federal deals with, and I've had that even come back from some of the folks at the Trade Commissioner Service. So, while I believe the Trade Commissioner Services can be quite helpful, I'm not sure it's necessarily targeting those smaller companies or as helpful as we think it could be to those smaller companies.
Okay, so we have to find a way to better communicate with those companies and show them the opportunities that exist really around the world, many of our trade agreements. And that's where I want to go. On our CETA agreement, Mr. Vail, I think we got to get you together with Mr. Hamill. I was just looking at our lumber trade with Europe. Like this was back 2022, 356 million with the United Kingdom, 101 million with Germany, and 100 million or so with France. So that may be an opportunity. I was talking to the shippers last week, and they've said out of the Port of Montreal, they've seen almost a double increase in the amount of containers now that are going to Europe over the last number of months. So we're seeing a great deal more trade happening with Europe, and that may be an opportunity, Mr. Hamill. Would that be an opportunity? I know we're trying to double the amount. We're trying to increase our amount of trade outside of the United States from 300 billion to 600 billion. Would that be an opportunity for your company?
Le marché européen, on n'a pas.
The European market. Well, we haven't actually considered this opportunity yet because we know that Europe exports to the US. So it makes kind of no sense to export to the European market when they're exporting to the US market. But no, we haven't looked at that yet.
We are exporting, and may be from different suppliers, but that may be something that, speaking with Mr. Vail and our trade commissioners' offices, I'd encourage to see if there is opportunity in the European market for your company. This, I believe, would be a good thing. In terms of the approach to the United States for our CUSMA review, I do know that the CFIB wants something quickly, but you also want the best deal, is what I've read in some of your reports, not just any deal and not to jump in anything. So, taking a pragmatic approach, an approach where we can get that best deal, do you think that is the approach that Team Canada should be taking?
Well, certainly the best deal is what everybody wants to get out of this. There's no doubt about it. But I think if it's going to take longer, then the supports need to be there. Supports that companies like Mr. Hermes, a lot of our members who feel like they are coming to the end of what they can afford to do without some sort of break. And I don't know that they're feeling like they're getting those supports right now. So if we are going to be waiting for the best deal, then I think that we need to make sure we're balancing that with making sure that the companies that are starting to get on the verge of having to make some difficult decisions feel like there is something in there for them as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm sorry the time is up. Thank you very much to our witnesses. It was very valuable information, and thank you for taking the time to come to the committee. Very much appreciated. Move adjournment. Okay.